The Girl with the Needle Lion, France. The year is 1832. The city is alive with the sound of looms. Day and night, the silk weavers work in crowded workshops, their windows glowing faintly above the narrow streets. In a small room, high under the roof, sits a girl named Clara. She's 10 years old. Her father is gone, lost to an accident at the river. Her mother is ill, coughing in the shadows. And so it falls to Clara to earn whatever she can. She holds a thin needle between her fingers. The thread slips through her hands, fragile and precious. Every stitch counts. She repairs torn sleeves for neighbors, men's socks for coins, and gathers scraps of silk left behind from the great weaving halls. To others they are waste. To Clara they are treasure. As she works, her imagination runs far. She dreams of gowns that move like flowing water, of colors that can light up even the darkest street. The world, she knows, is grey, heavy with coal smoke. But when she touches silk, she feels alive. Sometimes she pauses at the window. Below, children run and shout, free in the streets. Clara watches, her hands never resting. She does not envy them. She only whispers to herself, "One day, I will sew more than rags. One day, I will make beauty." That night, by the flicker of a single candle, she pushes the needle through a torn piece of fabric and makes her promise again. Her mother sleeps beside her. The room is silent, except for the sound of thread pulling through cloth. And though she is only a child, Clara feels certain she will stitch her way into another life. The years passed, and Clara's fingers grew swift and sure. By the time she was 12, she could mend a coat so neatly that no one could see the tear. She learned to stretch every scrap of fabric, to coax beauty out of what others threw away. Still, money was scarce. Her mother's illness worsened, and the attic room grew colder with each winter. To survive, Clara began sewing small pieces for neighbors. Caps, aprons, children's dresses. Some paid her in coins, others in bread. Often she was cheated. "You're only a child," they said, and gave her half of what she deserved. Clara swallowed the bitterness, but inside she promised herself that one day no one would dare dismiss her work. One afternoon, while carrying a bundle of mended clothes through the crooked streets, Clara passed the silk quarter. Behind open shutters she glimpsed the shimmer of fabrics, violet, emerald, gold rolling from the looms. The sight stopped her heart. She reached out, brushing her fingers over a scrap that had fallen to the street. Smooth, glorious, alive. With that scrap, Clara made a ribbon, simple but different. She wore it in her hair to the market. A wealthy woman noticed. She asked where Clara had bought such a thing. When Clara told her she had sewn it herself, the woman tilted her head. "Make me one," she said. "In blue." It was only a ribbon. But for Clara, it was a door opening. She worked through the night, stitching carefully, her hands trembling with both fear and joy. The next morning, she delivered it. The woman paid her, not much, but enough to buy food for days. For the first time, Clara felt something shift. She was not only repairing the past, she was creating something new, something that carried her name, even if no one spoke it aloud. And though her stomach was still empty, and her clothes still thin, Clara's heart beat with a new certainty. She had taken her first step beyond survival. The little ribbon opened doors, but it did not change the weight of Clara's life. Her mother's coughing grew sharper, her body weaker. Each coin Clara earned slipped quickly into the apothecary's hands. Medicines were expensive and often useless. One evening, as the bells of St. Nesia rang, Clara returned to the attic to find her mother lying still. The candle had burned low. The silence pressed against Clara's chest like stone. For a long time, she sat at the bedside, her hands clutched around the needle she had been using since childhood. She whispered, "I'll sew for both of us now." But the words could not ease the hollow inside her. The landlord wasted no time. With no parent left, Clara could not keep the room. She gathered what she owned, her needle, a bundle of cloth, and a few coins, and walked into the streets of Lyon. The city that had once shimmered with possibility now loomed as a place of shadows. She found work in a sweatshop, a vast airless room filled with the sound of machines and the weary eyes of girls not much older than her. The overseer barked orders, and they sewed until their fingers bled. For a bowl of soup, for a pallet of straw at night. Clara's dreams dimmed. Day after day she bent over endless seams, making dresses she could never afford to touch when finished. Her back ached, her eyes burned, and still she pushed the needle, hour after hour. Sometimes she thought the girl who once whispered promises into candlelight had died along with her mother. Yet even in the bleakness, Clara saved scraps of silk from the floor. Tiny pieces, no larger than a palm. At night, when the others slept, she stitched them together in secret. Slowly a shape emerged. A dress. Small, imperfect, but alive with color. It was madness. She knew she could be punished if caught. But she could not stop. Each stitch was defiance. Each piece of silk was a reminder. She was not born only to sew for others. She was born to create. And though she lived among shadows, Clara's secret dress glimmered like a hidden star waiting for its moment to be seen. The secret dress was no more than a patchwork of silk scraps, emerald beside crimson, gold stitched against violet. The seams were rough, the fit uneven, but when Clara held it up by the candlelight, it shimmered like something enchanted. One night, while she worked on it in silence, another girl in the workshop awoke and gasped. "Clara, what is that?" Her eyes were wide, not with anger, but with wonder. Word spread among the girls. They whispered about the dress, about how it was unlike anything they had ever seen. And though they were exhausted and hungry, the sight of it gave them hope, as if beauty could still exist in their world of shadows. Fate shifted weeks later. A baroness, wealthy and curious, visited the workshop to commission gowns. The overseer lined up the girls to display their stitches. Clara stood with her head bowed, her fingers trembling. But then, from her bundle of rags, the baroness noticed something bright. "What is that?" she asked. The overseer barked for Clara to answer. With shaking hands, Clara held up her secret dress. The room fell silent. The baroness studied it, her jeweled fingers brushing the fabric. "This is crude," she said at last. Clara's heart dropped. But then the baroness smiled faintly. "Crude but daring. Who taught you to combine colors like this?" "No one," Clara whispered. The baroness laughed softly. "Then perhaps no one has yet taught you what you may become." She ordered a proper gown from Clara herself, not through the overseer, but directly, with payment given into Clara's own hands. For the first time, Clara's work was seen not as labor, but as art. The baroness wore that gown to a ball, and whispers spread through Lyon of a dress that dared to break rules. The name of the seamstress was not yet known, but the city stirred. That night, Clara sat alone, holding the few coins she had earned. They were small, but heavier than gold. She pressed the needle between her fingers and whispered into the dark, "This is only the beginning." And though the road ahead would test her again, the spark had caught. Clara had been seen. Clara's gown for the baroness was like a door cracked open. More orders came, first from noble women curious about the daring young seamstress, then from merchants' wives who longed to be noticed in silks brighter than the rest. For the first time, Clara worked for herself. She rented a tiny room above a bakery, turned it into her workshop, and sewed until her fingers blistered. But with success came envy. Established dressmakers scoffed at her. "A child of poverty cannot be a lady's couturier," they muttered. One newspaper printed a cruel line: "A patchwork girl pretending at fashion." Clara read it, her throat tight, the words burning deeper than hunger ever had. Still, she refused to stop. She hired 2 young girls from the sweatshop, girls who reminded her of herself. Together they worked late into the night, the room filled with the hum of needles and the scent of bread rising from below. Laughter returned, fragile but real. Then came the fire. No one knew how it started. Perhaps a fallen candle. Perhaps jealousy turned to sabotage. Flames devoured the workshop in minutes. Clara and the girls escaped with nothing but the clothes on their backs. From the street, they watched the windows crack, the fabric she had labored over turning to ash. For days, Clara drifted. She had lost everything: her gowns, her money, her tools. She considered returning to the sweatshops, her dream reduced to smoke. But the girls she had hired found her. They stood before her in the cold, their eyes pleading. "You gave us a chance," one said. "Don't let the fire take it away." Clara looked at their faces and saw herself reflected there. The child stitching scraps in an attic, the young woman sewing in secret after hours. She felt the old promise stir. She could not end here. With borrowed tools, she began again. On the very same street, in a space no larger than a stable, she and her girls rebuilt stitch by stitch. Their laughter returned, and with it the whispers spread once more. The seamstress has risen from the ashes. Years passed. The tiny shop above the bakery was gone, the smoke of the fire long behind her. In its place stood a house of fashion, with tall windows and mannequins draped in silk that shimmered like sunlight on water. Lion streets, once grey and narrow to her, now seemed brighter when Clara walked them. People turned their heads, not because she was rich, but because her name had become a symbol. Inside the fashion house, young women bent over their work, not in misery, but with pride. Clara treated them as partners, not servants. She paid them fairly, taught them skills, and listened when they spoke. For every girl who entered her doors, she saw a reflection of who she had been: hungry, invisible, holding nothing but a needle and a dream. Her gowns travelled beyond Lyon, carried by noble women to Paris, even whispered about in London and Vienna. Critics who once mocked her wrote instead of her bold colours, her courage to defy tradition. She was no longer the patchwork girl. She was Clara Duval, founder of the house that bore her name. But in quiet moments, Clara returned in her mind to the attic, to the candlelight, to her mother's cough, to the promise whispered into the dark. "I will sew my way out of this." She saw that every twist in her life, the hunger, the sweatshop, the ribbon, the fire, was a stitch in a larger pattern. Each trial, each wound, had been part of the fabric. One evening, as the last light of day poured into her fashion house, Clara stood at the window. Below, her apprentices laughed as they carried fabric rolls inside. She smiled, pressing the old needle, her very first, between her fingers. Its tip was bent, its shine long gone, but it had carried her from attic to atelier, from scraps to silk. She placed it in a small box, not as a tool, but as a reminder. A thread connects every life, weaving through hardship and hope. And hers had been stitched, not in gold or fame, but in courage. The house would grow, the gowns would fade, but the red thread of her story would remain. Clara Duval had proven that even the smallest needle in the weakest hands can sew a destiny strong enough to outlast time.